Hi everyone. I really hope you can join us today at 8:30 UK time for our live discussion on Mark Saunokonoko's podcast, MADDIE, from 9NEWSAustralia. It was last year, it was 10 episodes, and it was a #1 podcast at the time. We'll also be looking at the new podcast coming out this year. They've released one episode about Christian Bruckner, so if anybody has any questions as to whether he's involved or not, you really need to listen to that episode. Mark is truly a great investigative journalist, and I think a lot of what you will hear in both podcasts will amaze you. We'll also be showing you the interview with Sonia Poulton that she did with Mark, and it's quite incredible to watch. I didn't even realize myself the lengths that Mark went to try and get the DNA, which Mark Perlin had offered to look at with new technology, and it hasn't been acknowledged by either Scotland Yard or the Portuguese police. He even went to the Prime Minister to see about whether or not it could be used. So anyway, these are a few clips that we will be looking at in greater detail at 8:30 UK time, and hope to see you there. Remember to subscribe if you want notification of when the live is starting. Okay, and thanks very much everybody for listening.
My name is Mark Saunokonoko, and I'm a reporter for 9.com.au, and this is a podcast called MADDIE. The MADDIE podcast series explores what many believe is the well-known story of Madeleine McCann's disappearance. But this is an investigation of the evidence that could make you question everything you thought you knew about the case.
Now this clip introduces you to their new podcast, They've Taken Her, which one episode so far has been released, and it's regarding Christian Bruckner. It's an amazing podcast, and I think you'll be interested to know exactly what Mark has found out.
So when the Christian B news broke, in the morning I sent out a tweet about my interview with Amaral. I wrote how Amaral seemed to have foreshadowed the Christian B development with an unnerving degree of accuracy and detail. About 2 hours passed, and then I started to get calls from media outlets in Australia and New Zealand.
A German man has been identified as a prime suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. I'm joined now by Mark Saunokonoko from 9.com.au. He's also the host of the podcast MADDIE.
I'm joined now by Mark Saunokonoko, who works for 9.com.au.
Joining us now is Australian journalist Mark Saunokonoko, who is the creator of the award-nominated #1 podcast on the McCann case.
Mark Saunokonoko from 9 News in Australia is on the line, and with us, he's just launched a new podcast about this case called MADDIE. Mark, hello.
Hi, Heather.
Are you convinced of the case?
So I guess immediately what my mind went to, Heather, was that I interviewed Gonzalo Amaral, and he was the lead detective on the case back in 2007. And I interviewed him last year in April 2019, so that's 14 months ago. Now, what he told me in that conversation, which lasted about an hour, he said, I was asking him about why British police seemed disinterested in DNA evidence that the podcast was looking at and why it wasn't being deciphered using modern technology, and he told me, this is what he said the British police were interested in wrapping up the case and that they would use a German pedophile who was in prison right now, and that would be the way that the case would be closed. So he said these things 14 months ago. He spoke about a vehicle that had been taken to Germany that had been forensically tested. It was really unusual to hear what Gonzalo Amaral was saying 14 months ago suddenly happen overnight.
Mark, so he was saying 14 months ago that the British police were concocting a plot as long ago as that to blame it on somebody and make a scapegoat.
That's exactly what he said. And I was staggered when he told me, but he broke it down bit by bit, and there it was today, down to the vehicle, down to the fact it was a convicted German pedophile currently in prison. People will look at that for what it is. Is there a wider conspiracy, or is this guy the guy who took Madeleine and maybe killed her that night?
Hans Christian Wolters is the German prosecutor who declared Bruckner a prime suspect. As the stories rolled in about Christian B., some really strong comments and quotes were attributed to Wolters. I'd wondered if some of his comments were being misinterpreted, so I contacted Hans Christian Wolters, requesting an interview. He agreed, and I was pleasantly surprised. He made no demands to see or vet any questions.
Do you know with 100% certainty that Christian B. was in Praia da Luz on the night that Madeleine vanished? Is that certain?
I cannot say this in percent. We have some evidence that he killed Madeleine McCann, but I'm not able to say on which day exactly. So because of the fact that his mobile phone was in the area where Madeleine McCann lives and was kidnapped, we think that he was in the Ocean Club on the 3rd of May in 2007.
Okay.
One day before this interview, Australian TV show 60 Minutes ran a report which claimed Bruckner's phone had pinged a cell phone tower belonging to the Ocean Club Resort, the resort where Madeleine went missing from. That cell phone ping, 60 Minutes said, put Bruckner in close proximity to the McCann's apartment on the night Madeleine went missing.
We know that the phone number which was used by our suspect on the 3rd of May 2007 was connecting in the mast belongs to the Ocean Club in Praia da Luz.
So what you're saying to me is that you can place Christian Bruckner at the scene?
Yes, we think so.
That explosive angle, placing Bruckner at the scene, was heavily reported and repeated by British tabloids and media worldwide in the days that followed. But could that be correct? A cell phone security and surveillance expert I've spoken with told me that the Ocean Club Resort never owned a cell phone tower in 2007. In the Portuguese police files, there are no cell phone towers that are owned or belong to the Ocean Club Resort. Only cell phone masts around the town, which are owned by the Portuguese telecommunications companies. I wanted Wolters to clarify this.
The cell phone tower in question, it is possible that it covers a radius of distance, and the ping of the cell phone to that tower could come from anywhere inside that radius.
Mark, Mr. Wolters does not know how far-reaching the radius of the phone mast is. So he presumes that the suspect was in the Ocean Club. He is presuming that, but he does not know for certain how wide the radius of the phone mast actually is.
Sonia Poulton gave me permission to use the interview she did with Mark on brand new YouTube a short while ago, and this is a clip just to introduce what she was discussing with Mark. It's quite amazing.
Saunokonoko should be joining us from Channel 9 in Australia. Hello, Mark.
Sonia, good morning.
Oh, good morning. Well, it's good morning, of course, for you, isn't it? What is it?
It is.
Just after 6 a.m. there, I think, isn't it?
5:30.
Wow. Listen, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so grateful, Mark. People have always said to me, if you're going to have a MADDIE conversation, please can you bring on Mark? Now, Mark, where do we start? You obviously are the creator of the award-winning #1 podcast, MADDIE. Phenomenal piece of work, 10 episodes, I believe it was, of which I contributed myself, of which you had, well, just about everybody really, didn't you? You've got cops, you've got journalists, you've got forensic experts, you name it really. So what I'd like to do is go back first of all, and what was it? Because as a journalist in the UK, I think you know how critical I am about the media's approach to the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, and I felt that people haven't been as forensic as they should have been. And suddenly I noticed this man from Australia was doing this work that British journalists should have done, given that we obviously have Operation Grange, £13 million, etc., etc. What made you first take interest in the case, Mark?
Yeah, just some casual conversations with friends led me to start taking a closer look at the case, Sonia. And you know, I was a latecomer. People like yourself have been looking at it from the start and for much longer than I had. But as soon as I started looking at it, you know, there were just a lot of curious elements to the case that didn't seem to make a lot of sense. Started looking at it more deeply. Began to write about it, heading towards the 10th anniversary of Madeleine's disappearance. And what I noticed is that as soon as those stories went on our website, the analytics showed that there was massive interest in the case still 10 years later. And so, you know, I sat down with my editor, Simon King, and Dan McHugh, who was the producer of the podcast, fantastic producer, and we just thought, here's an opportunity to tell a really complex story in the best way possible, which is the podcast in audio format. We can go through it nice and slowly with all the detail and hopefully capture, you know, all the important pieces and speak to all the important people. You know, the people we didn't speak to in the podcast, of course, were Kate and Jerry McCann. We tried, and also the Tapas 7. They didn't want to speak to us either. But you know, we spoke to a lot of other people, like you say, and yeah, here we are.
Well, you have a phenomenal cast list. I mean, you got the man himself, Gonzalo Amaral, didn't you?
That was amazing. You know, he came to the party real late. We were almost finished. We were up to episode 9, and then all of a sudden, the connections that were thrown out there, he replied and said, "I'm willing to speak," which was great. But in hindsight now, even a couple of years later, Sonia, I think, and perhaps the biggest sort of interview I think that we brought to the case was Dr. Mark Perlin.
Absolutely. We'll get to that in a second. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I completely agree with you. So,
but to speak with Gonzalo was fantastic, you know, and he said a lot of things over the course of an hour, which some of the things we just couldn't include because of the legal nature, as you know.
Right.
It's a tightrope.
Yeah. So.
Hi, everyone.